Hi guys, welcome back to Anderson Studios. Today I have a tutorial for you. It is a landscape painting and it's more or less inspired by Winslow Homer, one of the great watercolor painters. I often like to look at other artists' work, and a couple of the watercolorists I really love would be Singer Sargent and Thomas Moran, people you should look up. And I think many are familiar with Winslow Homer, maybe the most famous watercolor painter. But anyway, I always learn when I look at these painters' artworks, and I never stop finding new things to add into my own sort of toolbox skills that I collect along the way. And I have another tutorial later on. I'll be posting a video where we'll actually take one of these master works and we'll analyze it, the color, the composition, the technique, and then we'll try to reproduce that painting. It's a great activity to learn a lot about watercolor and painting in general. So get your paper taped down, get your coffee brewing, and let's get started. So I have my paper taped down here on 140-pound arches, and just talk about the drawing here. I don't want to divide my paper either left to right, right in the center, or top or bottom. And so I've placed the trees sort of off to the left and right. The horizon line is not exactly center. I've slightly shifted it above center. So kind of the rule of thirds about photography applies to art too, more or less. So my main focal point is kind of the tree to the left there, sort of separated. As far as the horizon line in there, you want to be careful that it doesn't line up. Like for that example, that tree branch there, I don't want it to perfectly line up and connect, otherwise your eye will sort of get confused and it'll kind of flatten the space out and make it kind of odd, so make sure that it doesn't line up with anything. The placement of the trees, like I said, on the right there's a grouping, and the one on the left, and there's a slight angle to these. So the trees there, of course, are slanting quite a lot that side, and then over to the other as a form of sort of visual balance. That one's angled that way. And so that gives you a kind of nice sort of, like I said, balance to the picture. So everything's not, leaning in the same direction. The first wash that's going in here is a cobalt blue. It's just straight cobalt blue. And I made a very pale wash so you can kind of see that on the palette, and I make sure I really mix it well, because cobalt is one of those granulating colors that likes to separate from the water. So this is on dry paper, and I think it's nice to do sometimes a sky that's not always a wet into wet. And I like wet into wet as much as the next person, but creating shapes by painting into dry paper and just painting around cloud shapes can give you a nice effect. It's something that Homer did quite a bit. He also did wet into wet, but I remixed my brush. I mixed that paint again because I went back. When I first start painting at the top, it's going to be a little bit more full intensity. And then as I get towards the lower part of the horizon line, it's going to kind of be a little bit lighter, and that's just the nature of how much paint's going on. And as you get down lower, the clouds, I want to make sure they're thinner in the sense of perspective. And for the darks here, I've mixed the cobalt with a tiny bit of orange, cadmium orange, just to neutralize it, and that's going in for the shadow areas. You don't have to wait till the cobalt blue sky is dry, but if you don't want it to bleed at all, then you might wait in between. So again, larger shapes at the top, and then smaller, thinner lines towards the background, putting them in there. As far as the far mountain, I got to make sure that it's not the same kind of bluish color. There's a lot of ways to do your background mountain or what's far in the distance, and you can make it close to the same value in a different color, or you can make it a different color and darker. I'm going to go with a kind of gray-green, and I mix cobalt again with the orange to neutralize it. And I did some test papers, and this is a good idea to paint right to the edge of your paper, and then you can hold it up and check if you like that color there or not. It's a good kind of test, and then you don't have to paint the color on and then say, oh no, that's not the right one, and you can't really take it off. So the other more intense greens I'm going to save for my trees and more foreground area. So we'll go in with that gray-green for the far mountain area. So again, you can see, really make sure you mix up these neutrals. That cobalt is going to want to separate from this mix of cobalt and a little bit of orange. And so every time I go to reload my brush, I make sure I mix that really well, because you'll be surprised how quickly it that blue's going to slide off to the side. So you don't want too much detail in your far background. I'm using this mop. It's a number 2 mop, and that kind of keeps me from making any sharp lines. And of course you can do it with any brush, but it's just soft. It's a squirrel hair brush, so it's really soft, and I'll use it for a lot of this painting because it doesn't make sort of geometric shapes, and it doesn't make really pointed lines. You can get a little bit if you're really careful, but like I said, it's so soft that it just sort of changes shape while you're painting, and that's a good thing because landscape, you want not to repeat your brush marks, and so that's kind of a good idea. So I'm carrying the far mountain all the way across to the right side, even though at the end of the painting that's going to be covered in a very dark area, but I just carry it over there. And then again, painting around your shapes that you want to keep light. That's why your pencil drawing comes into good use, because you have a good idea exactly where you're going to go. With watercolor, you don't have a lot of time to sit and think about where you're going to paint. You need to kind of work in a quick time. So like most watercolor, a lot of it's in the planning before you even start, and then sort of visualizing where you're going to go or what you're going to do, and then you got to work fairly quickly. And so I'm painting in some of these little window areas, and you want to not just stop your color at one line, and this kind of allows you to get some of that color through other colors, and you get a kind of interaction with the different colors. So not just green against the sky and green against the tree, but you get some of the other foreground colors will interact with those little windows of color. So you notice I've carried some of that greenish gray color down into my foreground a little bit. It's a sort of strategy for picking up color in different areas, and your eye will move around nicely. So going to the next range of mountains, the closer one, I'm going to be putting in the wash. Again, this is Sap Green, and it's just a more intense mix. And there's a little bit of Cobalt Blue mixed in that mixture. And so we're still using the same colors. So the sky was Cobalt, the far mountain was Sap Green and Cobalt, and a little orange And then here we've got Sap Green, Cobalt, and mostly just, there's not much orange in that. I try to keep it mostly the Sap Green color. It's more intense. So you'll notice that I got quite a bit of paint on there, and you can see little pools of the water, and that's important to maintain, to keep the areas active. So you don't want to paint until your brush is dry. And if an area is starting to dry a little bit, dab some color and paint in there, and keep it wet, and that'll allow you to keep reworking it. And this is Arches paper, so it really stays wet quite a while. In my experience, it's more forgiving in terms of giving you a few extra seconds of dry time. And then you can keep going back in a little bit. So there I'm just kind of putting in some hints of trees that are near the foreground. And again, breaking up the abrupt stop there by carrying that color into a little bit into the foreground. So I really love these Squirrel brushes. I didn't use one for the first probably 20 years I painted, and then I bought a couple. I bought this number 2, which I love. I use it a lot. And then I bought a number 6, which I wanted it. It was just a huge brush, and it's fun for larger sheets. This sheet's quite small, you can see, and so I sometimes work a full sheet, which is 22 by 30 inches. And so my number 2 mop is really doing the same kind of work this is on a bigger scale. So this color dried a little lighter than I wanted, and I wanted a lot more of that cobalt and granulation of the cobalt in there, so I mixed largely just cobalt. There is a little bit of green in there. I'm going to go over this again so we get a more rich and a more blue kind of area. So what I'm going to do first is get it wet. And why I want to do that is because, like I said, this cobalt blue is a highly granulating color. Like a lot of blues are, ultramarine blue, and they like to sort of run into the little texture of the paper, the little kind of dimples that the paper has, and getting this wet first will sort of allow that to happen more easily and in a more kind of fluid way, not too controlled. And so this is just water going on there first. And then I make sure I go over a little bit, just because the paper's drying a little bit, so I want to make sure it's all wet and it's going to dry evenly. So now that's pretty much cobalt, 90% cobalt and maybe 10% sap green. And I'm just sort of dabbing it in there because the paper's wet, it's just going to run. And so the effect will be that a lot of that sediment will sort of pool and give me a sort of atmospheric distant mountain effect, and it'll kind of hint at some variation of blue-green colors once it settles in. So knowing which colors granulate is kind of a good thing to know, and you can test it on your paper. Get some paper and a lot of heavy wash and test the color and see how it does. You need to use a cold press though, or a rough press paper. So here I'm just lifting out some of the pools if you get too much water, it's going to dry in a kind of odd way. So you're going to get, as the paper dries, it's going to suck that pool of water back out and give you a kind of blossom. So this dried, and you can see it's a lot more vibrant, a lot more alive in that area of color. So it really made a big difference. So keeping in mind that, as you layer colors, you don't need to remix a lot of the same colors. You can layer over just a paint from the tube because you've already got color on there. I'm choosing my greens here, and I want more intense greens for my trees. I've got these gray greens that are in the background, and so we need to sort of, to bring things forward, we can do it in two ways. We can use a very dark color, or we can use a more intense color. And so we're going to go with the sap green is that bright green there. It's the same green I've been using. And then the darker green is the same sap with just a more heavier mix. So I'm just going to go over my whole tree area with that color, all the foliage, all the greens. And again, using that mop, and you'll notice that I'm sometimes turning it or sometimes pushing it just to get different shapes. What's going to really kill a landscape painting is if you're making the exact same brush strokes over and over again. I mean, it's going to have an effect, but it's going to probably be a little static. So trying to vary how the paint's going on. Sometimes a little, as you can see, dabbing or dragging or pushing. I'm using the side of the brush quite a bit, so I'm not getting a point. And even though I put in a pretty detailed sketch, I'm not exactly following everything that I drew in. I used it more as a guide to know where I was going to go. If you take too long to fill in your sketch exactly how you drew it, you're gonna lose time, and your paint's gonna dry before you can finish doing it. So you gotta kind of work a little faster. So this green will be very transparent. You'll see all the background and the different value coming through, but near the end of this painting we're going to be doing a darker glaze over a lot of that, so you're not going to see the horizon line, or a lot of that very far right side will just almost be a black kind of value. You'll probably notice that as I get near the end of this, and I'll change things compositionally. So I may not keep what I have there. You'll see a lot of that lower right corner gets painted out. It was just I'm looking at the composition as a whole, and what I think works or what doesn't work. So I don't feel like you have to follow exactly what you originally started with, and let the paint sort of take you. So this green's going to carry through most of the foreground area, just because it's all in about the same distance from the viewer, and we'll keep that intensity up close. I'm also making sure I get all the little white specks out. Don't think you'll go back later and do it, because you won't be able to. So if you see little white dots or specks that you didn't cover, make sure you sort of dot those while it's still wet. I can't tell you how many times years ago I painted a painting, and then I I finished it and I'm like, oh no, there's some white of the paper showing through here and there and another place that I didn't cover, and now it's not really very possible or very easy to go back and get rid of it. So a lot of these green areas sort of get lost and mixed between, you know, what green goes with what tree, and it's really not that important. Again, thinking overall as a composition and really making a design. You know, after all, painting is really a design of shape and color, and if you know, can think that way, then you can enjoy creating a design and you know, take a look at your painting between drying times and decide if you think that's good design or not. It's easy to get caught up in the subject matter and say, oh, I like this tree, I really want to have this tree there, I've got to have it there, or but it may not function very well as a whole in your picture. So there's always some editing going on, non-stop editing as you're painting. So this area was actually in America. This was in Red River Gorge, and I used to go camping there a lot. Of course, this was like 25 years ago or 20 years ago, and but I camped there. I don't know how many times, probably 30, 40 times, backpacking in there and rock climbing. And Red River Gorge is just has a kind of a special memory for me, that place. And so this is a variation on a painting I did about that time, and took so many photos. I wish I had the photo I could show you guys, but I don't have it. I'm now living in Korea, and I don't have all my pictures. You know, at that time in the 90s, we weren't using digital cameras and saving images on the computer or Facebook or somewhere. So my actual film prints of this area are back in the States. So here I'm putting in a darker mix. I showed you some of those color swatches earlier, and this is just a much darker mix of Sap Green. And it's going on in just a few of the areas, in the shadow areas. And this again is, a lot of it's going to get painted over. So the last, this is almost to the end of the painting, and I'm going in with a really dark mix here of, again, Sap Green. And to darken it more, I've added a little bit of the Ultramarine Blue. And so I'm using a smaller brush this time because it's going to give me more control, because I'm getting near the end here. And this is a number 6 Kolinsky Sable. It's a round, but it's not a pointed round. And the brush doesn't have any point really at all, because I've had that brush since oh my God, since about 1990. And the tip's sort of worn down after so many years of painting, and so it has a very fat round end. And what that allows me is to get a little bit more, kind of like the squirrel effect of that brush, that you get a very natural shape. It's not a pointed line or anything, and because it's Kolinsky Sable, it holds a lot of water, and it allows you to paint for quite a long time. And that's actually a Cirrus 110 series brush. Winsor and Newton makes those. I'm not sure if they make them anymore. I know they make a basic Kolinsky Sable brush, and then there's of course the Series 7 brush too, which is Kolinsky, but this one, I'm not sure they make that one anymore. But yeah, hold on to all your brushes. Never get rid of any brushes because these old brushes are sometimes the ones that work the best for landscape and these kind of, natural shapes. So you start to see that that background area is getting covered up, and so I really didn't even need to paint my mountain all the way across. But I wasn't sure if I was going to keep some little windows through the trees or not, but I didn't. And that dark's going to carry through all the way down into the left side of the painting, and then also into that tree on the left. So I think you can kind of see my decision making as I'm painting. Sometimes there's a hovering brush and a scan of the picture. And I'm always doing that because I'm not just focused on what I'm painting right there, but the whole picture and deciding, how things are relating to one another. So especially when you're beginning, if you paint on a small scale, it's so much easier to see the whole picture. Even a sheet of paper that's 10 by 14 is actually gets quite big when you get so close to it. So being able to see the entire painting as it works it all together is really helpful. And also, if you work small, you can finish a painting in one day easily, in a few hours. This painting was I would say it took about 3 hours or 4 hours to do. I did this over time because I was filming and doing other things, but uh, yeah, if you work small, then you can complete a lot of paintings from start to finish and get an idea of the whole process. Learning how to finish a painting is, I think, the hardest part. Learning to draw and learning to mix color, that's one thing, but I can't tell you how many students have asked me, is it finished? They're looking at their painting and asking me, do you think it's finished? And I'm like, well, let's take a look. And so only you will know. Of course, there are sort of, sometimes a painting just looks unfinished, but there are varying stages of this painting I could have stopped, especially near the end where maybe I should have. And so it's not always easy to know when is enough. So I think you can start to see that these darks are really, adding a lot of contrast to that background. And um, and we get the final, even darker wash on the painting. It's really gonna have a full range of value. So I'm the kind of painter who really likes to have dark areas and then white, from the whole range of values, 0 to 10, and I think that makes for a more visually stunning picture. I do sometimes like a kind of low-key painting that has all very light values, a sort of sunset, or all the kind of hazy, sort of misty look too. That's nice. But I generally prefer very strong contrast in my paintings. I had mentioned Winslow Homer earlier, and one thing that drew me to Winslow Homer and why this sort of is a kind of inspiration from his work is he used a lot of very dark colors. So if you look at his watercolors, there is pretty much an almost black value in every painting, and sometimes very large areas are really dark, and so. I think the contrast and is quite dramatic in his paintings. Um, You'll notice sometimes, like I just use my finger to lift a little color out. If you do it while it's still wet, you can just kind of touch it and lighten it. Uh, Careful though, it can be dangerous. So here's this number 2. This is a Kolinsky Sable round, a Winsor Newton Series 7. And just using it for some of the branches to put in some detail. And you can see I'm using it to the side or at the point. And I often do that with all my brushes as I'm painting, just to give, again, variation of brush mark. That's my oil brush I'll use to scrub out or lighten up. You just use that oil brush and just touch it because it's all dry. My brush is dry and you can scrub out an area. Oil brush has been in a few of my videos, and I use it to lift out color and erase things basically. Again, just in some of those windows, that horizontal line of those branches sort of repeats the horizon line, and that kind of picks up a rhythm. So now going in with the full intensity Sap Green. This is right from the tube, and as I mentioned earlier, when you're painting right from the tube, it doesn't matter because I've already got color on my paper, so every color I put on top is going to be changed a little bit. So I'm just going in. I've got a huge mop here, or sorry, a huge squirrel brush. It's a number 14, but it has a little point to it. So why I might use this is because it holds a load of water and paint, and I can just keep going with it, and it has a little bit of a point. So this saves me having to reload the brush. I can go in a lot of different areas with that brush. That's a Babara 70R series Squirrel round. And that brush wasn't expensive. I think I paid about $20 for that. Well, I mean, relatively speaking, it wasn't expensive. So you can see we've progressed from gray, neutral, green to a kind of middle tone green, and now to a very intense green in our foreground. I added over here, which I'll blot out in a second, but I wanted, well, my thinking process was I wanted something almost orange to interact with that blue. I ended up with a little bit of it at the end, but I took a lot of this out because I thought it was too strong. And so some of the reasons why I choose colors are just because I know they function well with other colors. And the video gets dark here for about just 30 seconds, but I couldn't fix that. But anyway, I went over it with some raw umber, and just to lighten it up and then blot it out, and then later I paint over that area a little bit to clean it up. So I don't always use paper towel on my paintings, but there you can see it. I've added some little tree trunks and some darks in there. So the painting is almost finished now. I'm going in with the last, it's a super dark, what we call a chromatic black. So chromatic black is not using black. I didn't use any black in this painting. I mixed this with Ultramarine Blue, Sap Green, and a little rose madder, which is a kind of earthy red. And So it's going to be sort of a silhouette uh, of the tree here to the far right. And I'll pick that color up too on the left side corner, the lower corner too. So the blacks are hard to see really in film and video. It's not black, but it will appear on camera as black. So if you see it in person, you're going to see more color in there. The painting's almost at the end here. Few touches on the left side and bring some dark to the left and a little bit more green to the foreground. And yeah, I painted out pretty much all that right side there. I just decided I didn't want to have any distraction over there from my left side kind of focal point. So bringing that dark over there, you can see the difference right away. Your eye can jump now back and forth. It's a sort of visual strategy. That's about the end of the painting. I did do a few other things in here that I didn't film, just a few touches in that foreground with some green. So here's the final painting, and I hope you guys enjoyed watching this painting. I had fun doing it, so give it a try. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching the video. If you did, please subscribe, and I have a lot more videos coming up soon. Also, coming up next month, I'm going to be offering some online courses, full courses in basic drawing, landscape drawing, as well as beginner watercolor. And on down the line, we'll be doing some oil and acrylic painting too. So stay tuned and see you guys soon.